Welcome back to the Birdhouse Dynasty show. And today we're going to take a look into some ambiguous backfields. There's a lot of action that happened in the first week of the NFL preseason. And so we're going to take a look at what changes may have happened according to the ADPs. Most of these are, like I said, these are some ambiguous backfields where we have some running back battles going on for the second and third running backs in some teams. And in some cases, we still aren't quite 100% sure of who the number one back is. And so we'll get started with that case. And that is what's going on for the LA Chargers. Over there in Los Angeles, we've got J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal, Jared Patterson even signed over there. And so we're going to start off. Matt is in the house. And Matt, what are your thoughts right now with the LA Chargers backfield?
Thanks, Chris. Glad to be back in the Birdhouse, first and foremost. But in regards to LA's backfield, man, I don't know really what to expect. From a fantasy standpoint, and you bring in the values of where you're able to draft these guys or what you're able to get them for in a trade scenario. But, I think maybe the best thing is just look at Baltimore's offense, right? You just got a different hardball running the show. But Greg Roman will be calling the plays and running that offense. So I would imagine that Gus Edwards is going to be their goal line back, much like he was supposed to fill last year. So I think you'll see a lot of touchdown production out of Gus Edwards as long as he's healthy. But then when you look at your running back between the 20s and you just look at contracts, I know they're talking, there's a lot of good coach speak going around about Dobbins out of their camp, but he's only making like what, 50 grand guaranteed or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's no investment there. None.
No.
Kamani Vidal makes more as a rookie. So, I think you'll see Dobbins early, but I think as the season goes on, you're going to see Kamani Vidal because that's where their investment is. And I think you'll see Gus be they're just going to ride him until the wheels fall off of the Gus bus. So, yeah, look, from a draft standpoint, if you're in best ball, if you can get a couple pieces of that backfield and kind of hedge your bet. But if I'm having to draft one, I'm probably just going to take Gus Edwards because I know the touchdown production is going to be there.
Yeah. So for me, I look at it, and it's really no different between redraft and dynasty. They're both going around the same range. But yes, I do want a piece of this backfield. There's three options right now. Again, Dobbins, Gus, and Vidal. And earlier in the offseason, during rookie season, Vidal had a ton of hype, and he was going, some were taking him as high as a second round in rookie drafts, which I thought was nuts. But crazy. As far as a third or fourth round flyer, it was totally fine. But I look at the Chargers backfield, and it's probably going to end up being some sort of mix of what we saw in Baltimore and then also what we've seen from a Justin Herbert-led offense. And in a Justin Herbert-led offense, the running backs got tons of targets. Most of them were Austin Eckler. But as a young quarterback, to develop that tendency to dump it down, that's rare. Most young quarterbacks, they tend to look at their first or second read and then take off. They don't dump it off to the running back. But we've seen that from Justin Herbert, where he is comfortable dumping it off to the running back. So regardless of whatever play calling you're getting from Greg Roman, you're still going to have that tendency from Herbert. So in that regard, whoever does win the third down role, whether that's Dobbins or Vidal, you're going to see a lot of targets to them. And so I think that's one of the most important things for me. Then, of course, you have the argument that you brought up where you think Gus will be the goal line back. Dobbins is built big enough to handle that as well. But when you've got three bodies that can do the work, yes, it's looking like sort of a split backfield. But for me, I love getting Dobbins right now just because I see that him as the most versatile of the three. So like an underdog, I've been getting Dobbins a lot lately. Because all three of them are generally drafted around the same range. And so I guess I just look at Dobbins as the guy. I know contractually his isn't that great, but at the same time, he's on a prove it deal. So this is like his last shot. And I think that he's going to get it out of the gate, and then we'll see what happens. I mean, none of us can really say what's going to happen. We're all just guessing here with these three. And I'm just trying to, I guess Dobbins to me is the most talented of the three. And so that's the way I would lean right now. I don't know though, in Dynasty, I don't know that you could get him for a third. I mean, anybody who's got Dobbins is probably looking at it like a free lottery ticket right now. And why would they give up why would they give him up right now for a third? When you could just sell him for a second after week 1 if he has a good week.
Yeah, well, I mean, it also
really could do it
on their roster construction, where they are within their league, if they're in a rebuild or not.
Oh yeah, for
and
sure.
How heavy they are on running backs as well, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, if he's sitting on 4 or 5 guys that are starters across the board, well, maybe he doesn't care, so maybe he can. So, I'll tell you this: in Dynasty, and I did this in a league that we're in. I took Gus Edwards and I got Kamani Vidal to hedge my bet. I actually wanted to get Dobbins, but he got taken before I could get him. I wanted to have all three just to see what would happen. But that was a best ball week too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing to get into with best ball. Is it good to own 2 guys or even 3 in one particular backfield, or do you want to spread yourself out to as many backfields as possible? Do you want a piece of as many backfields as possible? And for me, it kind of depends on what back you're talking about, because these backfields aren't all built the same. Some teams decide to do it like the Titans, which is the next backfield we can talk about actually, where the Titans went out and they already had Tajay Spears. They let Derrick Henry go. And then they went out and brought in Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is basically the same skill set as Tajay Spears. And we saw what happened in Dallas last year with Pollard when they tried to make him the every down back, that his efficiency went down. His fantasy numbers actually didn't improve at all. His average per carry plummeted, and he still got enough volume to where he was fantasy relevant. But the main problem is that last season, especially in redrafts, people were having to take him in the second round of most leagues, even back into the first in some cases. So there was a huge loss for people who took Tony Pollard that early in redraft last season. But now this year, to me, he presents a great value, especially if you go 0 running back or hero running back, which is pretty popular as a strategy this year. Tony Pollard in the 9th round, I mean, that looks pretty good to me. What do you think, Matt?
So, yeah, I agree with you. I was one of those people who drafted Tony Pollard in the 2nd round of a redraft league. Now, full disclosure, I won that league, but Tony Pollard wasn't on my roster. So, and I got rid of him. So last year, like, he put up some fantasy numbers to stay in the conversation, but it was more of a detriment because there was like, well, look at the next 5 games. He's going to be great for the playoff run. And it just never happened ever. So, yeah, the interesting part about him going to Tennessee, and you mentioned he and Spears having the same skill set, I think because of that, it's truly going to be close to a 50-50 split there. So
Yeah.
I think in the scenario we talked about owning the backfield, this one, it's less investment because it's two, right? So you don't have to invest a third roster spot like you
No.
would in LA to own the whole backfield. But I'm investing more in Spears because he's younger. I think he's a little bit stronger as well. And he already has some built-in chemistry with the organization and team. So I think I lean towards Spears. I know you get them right around the same price, 9th, 10th round.
Yeah.
Shoot, their ADPs are, I mean, darn close, aren't they? Let's see. Tajay currently is at 99 and Tony Pollard's at 79. So you're about a round difference there. A little more than a round. But I mean, I take Spears around later, and I'll take another top end.
Yeah, I mean, if
higher,
that's the case where it's a 20 pick discrepancy, almost 2 full rounds, I would lean towards Spears as well, because the odds of an injury is pretty even between the two, and so at some point one of them is going to get hurt, and you're going to want whoever's still left healthy in that case, because their volume's going to go up tremendously for however many weeks that would be the case. So yeah, it's a tough take. I mean, personally, I prefer to just get one piece of certain backfields just so I can spread myself out. Like if I'm targeting, say, I want 3 running backs in rounds 9 through 11, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would want, one of the Titans running backs, one of the Pittsburgh running backs, or one of the Bengals running backs. And those are the 2 other backfields we're going to get into. But I just would want to spread myself out. Now, where you grab the Chargers backs in that one league, I mean, you grab those guys in round 14 or 15. So at that point, that doesn't bother me at all.
Well, here's the other part too. I'm not trying to own a backfield if I'm in redraft. I'm just like you said, I will spread it. I want one out of it. And in the Titan scenario, Spears comes at a greater discount. I'll take him just because he'll be available. And I actually like Spears. I like his opportunity to, because he was crazy efficient last year. And if he's in a similar role where he gets maybe a little bit of increase in volume and is in a true 50-50 split there, if he carries over part of that efficiency, I think he's due for a really good year at a wonderful price. I think he's going to absolutely overplay his ADP or outplay it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next backfield, and that would be the Bengals backfield. And so the Bengals had Chase Brown in the wings. They let Joe Mixon go to free agency, who signed with the Texans then. And then the Bengals went ahead and signed Zach Moss, who came on last season for the injured Jonathan Taylor and had some monster weeks. I mean, I remember playing him in my flex happily for quite a few weeks there in the season. But at the same time, we're all looking at Zach Moss, and we just know that he's a jag. He's just a guy, right? Like, how talented really is Zach Moss? He never was able to overtake Devin Singletary in the backfield in Buffalo. Obviously, he wasn't overtaking Jonathan Taylor in Indy, but he showed flashes. He showed that he could pound it up the gut for the Colts. And then he's been nursing an injury so far in camp. So Chase Brown got an opportunity to showcase what he had in week 1 of the preseason, and he looked all right. I say that because his numbers look decent. He had a couple catches, broke one for a decent gain over 20 yards. But if you saw on Twitter, some of the video highlights also highlighted him twice on run attempts that were supposed to go directly up the gut, and he bounced both of those outside for losses. They were simple carries that would have gotten, just by running it right up the gut, he would have gotten a simple 3 or 4 yards at least, if not more. But he decided to bounce it outside, and then that is the problem, because when you're running an offensive play caller is going to see that and be like, hey, I was designing that play so we were in, 2nd and 6 or 2nd and 5, not in 2nd and 11 or 2nd and 12, because that narrows down your play calling options. So ultimately what it comes to is Chase Brown still looks like the same guy from last year. And as excited as I am about his talent, I don't know if last week really helped him. It looks like Zach Moss might have actually been helped from last year. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Matt?
So, well, one, Zach Moss has never really earned more touches. He just happens to be the guy that's waiting there when the guy who has earned them can't do them. So that's something to take note of. The other thing, Chase Brown, he's got that catching upside, which we like. We like where we can draft him. But there is that risk of, is he actually going to get the opportunities? Because he is in a shared backfield and he is rather unproven. We saw flashes last year. What was he, like 4.1 per carry and 11.1 per reception? Really good numbers for a rookie, even in limited touches there. So it's exciting to think about. But like you mentioned, if he's got the dance feet in the backfield and he's trying to bounce it, trying to just take the 3 or 4 yards, you got to. Right? And that's going to come with time and carries. He's going to figure that out. It's just, are they going to let him figure that out? I've got a share or two of Chase Brown. I have 0 of Zach Moss. It's a backfield I'm steering clear of for the most part. I happened to acquire Chase Brown in Dynasty last year as an add-on to a trade. So I'm not looking to get into this backfield, but I have a share or two of Chase Brown. So
yeah, I'm with you there. I do have a share or two.
I'm taking Chase Brown because of the upside, right?
Yeah.
We know Zach Moss.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you there. I have a share or two of Chase Brown as well. And it's simply just a bet on the talent. The talent is obviously there with Brown. It isn't there with Zach Moss, but when you're talking NFL football, sometimes, you just need that guy that can get you 4 yards when you need 3.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want that guy that gets you -3 when you need 3.
Yeah.
So the Bengals, I mean, they have a different play caller this year, but I don't think that it's really going to change much from the way they were calling games previously, even with a new play caller. So I think they'll still be looking for somebody to kind of replicate what Joe Mixon was doing for them. And we all kind of know Joe Mixon's calling card wasn't exactly efficiency. It was just volume.
Right.
And with that said, it kind of leans me towards Zach Moss being that kind of filler. And then they would just kind of keep Chase Brown in the same role that he was last season. Now, I could see them doing that and then giving Chase Brown a few more opportunities on the ground. But ultimately, I mean, we're looking at probably like a 55-45 or just a straight 50-50 split again. And so it is kind of ugly, I'd say, right now. At least after week 1.
I tell you, I'll give you scenarios for me to get excited about it. One, if it's best ball, then I'm excited to have a piece of Chase Brown for those boom weeks when he does get a few passes that he takes, right? That's one. And then the other would be, a deeper dynasty, right? 30+ roster spots. Right. And then it's like, now I can bet on that upside, because if it does hit, wonderful. If it doesn't, my investment is very small here. So, that's where I get excited. Best ball, I love him in any format, but if it's best ball, it's great. If otherwise, if it's like just a standard rostering spots, then it's dynasty only, deep dynasty for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can move to the next backfield, which is pretty similar. These two guys probably go a hair above the guys from Cincinnati, but this is the Pittsburgh backfield we're going to talk about now, which has Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. both incumbents from last season. And we all know Najee Harris had the big draft capital, and then Jalen Warren, I don't know, I can remember. I think he was an undrafted free agent. But either way, they both got plenty of work last season and are looking for even more work this season, considering Arthur Smith is now there in Pittsburgh. And we all know we all hate Arthur Smith from last season, what he did with Bijan. But the fact is, the guy was a pretty good play caller when he was in Tennessee, and he had Derrick Henry. And, Henry had an absolute monster of a run there with Arthur Smith. He had that 2,000-yard season. He had the other season where he was on pace for 2,000 again, but only played half the year. And so what I'm getting at is that Arthur Smith has a job in the NFL for a reason. All right. He is there because he knows the game, and he had success when he was in Tennessee. Now, the roster that the Steelers have pretty much fits Arthur Smith's role, format, what he's trying to accomplish. So I just see either of them. I like either Najee or Jalen Warren, honestly. I don't know what you think. Are you fading one, or are you happy to get either, Matt?
Well, I lean more towards Jalen Warren myself, just because he's just been more efficient the last couple of years, and he's more the pass catcher, or at least that's the stigma. So I like that, and then also it didn't help that Najee had the fifth option weight. He doesn't, they're not renewing his option there. So, I mean, I could see this argument, right? I like to overthink things, right? So maybe they're not giving him his fifth year option. They're not going to exercise that, but they're going to workhorse him for early in the season and then deal him. So, I mean, I could see an argument for either one, especially with Arthur Smith, like you said, in the type offense schematically he likes to run. You got to think they're both going to be heavily involved. So, but I do lean Jalen Warren for the pass catching upside. Both of us tend to be more zero running back style builders. So we like those pass catching guys. Plus, I mean, there's about nine positions difference in ADP. Najee goes at 74. Jalen Warren's at 83. So, I mean, I still like Jalen Warren better. That's just me. I like Jalen Warren. I think he's a better back, but Najee is going to get carries.
Yes.
At least for
I look at these two like I did about 2 years ago. It was with Zeke and Tony Pollard. That's what I compare them to kind of right now. And Warren was very efficient last season. I can see him still being very efficient this year, like Pollard was when he had Zeke there for the first and second down banger role. Then Pollard would come in when the defense was softened up or had a nickel back in there. And then he was able to, that's why he was more efficient in reality. But I guess for me, it does come down to format too. Like if it's a full PPR league, I do prefer Warren in that case. As do, if you go back to the Bengals, I would prefer Chase Brown in that case then.
Sure.
And in one league, it was a redraft league. I had rounds 9, 10, and 11. I know I got Jalen Warren and Chase Brown in that league because it was a full PPR. But in a half PPR or even a league, I don't know if anybody plays at any leagues without any sort of PPR anymore. But in a half PPR, that one I might lean a little more towards Najee. I just see Najee in the kind of the Bijan role last season. So I think Najee will get the first opportunity. He'll be the goal line back. So it kind of depends on how well Russell Wilson runs the offense. Because they obviously need more touchdown opportunities for Najee to get those goal line carries. But I do think that Pittsburgh's offense will be better than it was last season. So, I mean, there's going to be at least a few more opportunities inside the red zone. Can't be much worse than it was with Mason Rudolph running it.
Yeah, I mean, not to
So
mention that, I mean, yeah, just the quarterback upgrade, they're going to be better. Doesn't matter which one it is. Doesn't matter if it's Fields or Russell, or Wilson, I should say.
Yeah.
They're going to be better.
Yeah. So I'm on board with drafting either of those two, especially in the hero or zero running back format. All right. So then the next two we've got are a little less exciting, but nevertheless still worth diving into. And we have first up, we have the Carolina Panthers backfield. Now this one is backfield that most people are probably just gonna overlook. For one, you've got a rookie in Jonathan Brooks, who I'd say, the majority of your redrafters who are just starting to look at football right now, they have no idea who this guy is. But for those who play Dynasty or are just college football fans in general, about Jonathan Brooks. He sat behind Bijan and Roshan Johnson for a year there, and got his opportunity last season with Texas, and he stepped up and he showed he could do it all. He was a full 3-down back, could run up the middle, catch passes on the outside, but then unfortunately he tore his ACL. And so now we're kind of in limbo. I know that I own him in a redraft league that I drafted. We drafted on Super Bowl Sunday. But anyway, he's just sitting on my IR, and I can't get any value for him right now. Nobody wants him, which I can understand. He hasn't done anything yet. But I guess it just comes down to format and whether you want to take, use that 9th, 10th round pick on a rookie that isn't going to play until maybe October, or grab one of the other guys we just talked about, Najee, Warren, Chase Brown, or Zach Moss. They all go in that same range. So, or you could just wait and then grab Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, that's true. Jonathan Brooks,
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Brooks's ADP is at 84. Chuba Hubbard is at 145. So
it's a huge discrepancy.
So I would say early, like it's just a late round. I know I'm going to have an RB1 for 2 to 4 weeks. Take Hubbard. I mean,
yeah,
the last pick of your draft. I mean, you get an RB1 for a few weeks. So that's actually not bad. Brooks is going to require more of an investment, but I'm telling you, he is going to be on teams that win, and he is going to help it happen. Because what we know about Canales' offense, he will get that running back carries and catches, and Jonathan Brooks is an every down back. He can do that all. So, I've got a share in Dynasty, but from a value standpoint, I'm surprised his ADP is still this high, knowing that he's not going to play for 4 weeks, 2 to 4. So
right.
I'd love to have it. If he just fell, if it's more of an uneducated league and they're just like, I don't know about this guy, he's a rookie, I don't know anything about it, and he falls to you in like the 10th or the 12th, well then that's a surefire pick for me, regardless of format.
Yeah, I think it does truly come down to knowing your league mates. You know your league, and certain leagues, the rookies fall, right? Mm-hmm. Other leagues are more where the majority of everybody is on the up and up, and especially if you have a redraft league that a bunch of the other guys play Dynasty, they're going to know who Jonathan Brooks is.
Right.
But if you're in a league where, you could grab him in like the 11th or 12th because he's just going to fall with nobody knowing who he is. By all means, I wouldn't have a problem stashing him.
And here's a fun one, and this would apply to a lot of the guys we're talking about that you can get decent values based on people not necessarily knowing who they are, being tentative to take a rookie. Auctions. in auction format drafts, you will be able to steal Jonathan Brooks. You will be able to steal him. Especially if he's going at 84 ADP, that he might not even be a player that gets nominated while people still have the majority of their budgets, and most people will be running low anyway. So
you'd be able to steal Chuba Hubbard too in an auction.
Yeah. Heck, you probably don't even need to draft him. You probably just pick him up on a waiver if you want. For when you need him.
Depending on how deep the rosters are.
Right.
Yeah, he could be just left on waivers. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's just say
I just know that from history and having Chuba Hubbard on one of my main dynasty teams, I've been able to plug and play him a few times over the past couple of seasons, and I have not had any issue with doing that. When the guy gets the volume and when he's the only guy there, which is going to be the case weeks from most of September, we'll say. In that Canales offense, we know from what happened with Rachaad White last year, nobody was expecting a whole lot from him. I'm a Tampa fan, and I wasn't expecting him to do anywhere near what he pulled off last season in getting that kind of volume. I looked at Rachaad White and I was like, ugh, Sean Tucker might overtake him for the first and second down role. But then Tucker got hurt, and Rachaad White just balled out. I mean, there's no other way to say it. The guy just showed up and played. And even though the efficiency wasn't really there, he did do those things that we were talking about, what Chase Brown wasn't able to do. Rachaad White's average per carry wasn't great, right? But he still kept the Bucs in positive situations offensively, so that it helped the offense as a whole by just picking up at least 2 or 3 yards on a carry up the middle rather than a loss. And so I think that if Chuba Hubbard is able to do that for the Panthers early on in the season, it could bode well for him later on in the season too, because we can't predict what kind of injuries are going to happen over the course of a season. And, we all hope Jonathan Brooks comes back healthy and stays healthy, but you never know. As the season wears on, you can't predict injuries. So Chuba could end up being somebody that you get a lot of usage out of, not just the beginning of the season.
Yeah, because that injury could linger and he could not be ready in 2 to 4. It could be 4 to 6.
And the Panthers have no reason to rush him back. I mean, there's no expectations for that team right now to even make the playoffs, right? So why force it on this guy who, even though you had little draft picks, they had few draft picks going into this draft, they still used a second rounder on a running back. So that's got to show you that they're bought into him.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, here's Rachaad White's numbers last year, right? 272 attempts. That's a lot. That's a lot. He had 990 yards, 3.6 per carry. Okay.
Yeah.
And then receptions, he had 70 targets, caught 64 of them. So any other running back in Tampa Bay that put up numbers isn't in the top 65. So
no.
Doesn't really matter, but that's from a volume standpoint. He's got 342 touches. That's why Carolina's backfield is semi-attractive. It's not attractive with the names they have there or the situation, other than what that coach is going to give the running back. So that's why I like if you can get Jonathan Brooks to fall in a redraft, pull that trigger. If it's an auction, probably going to get a good deal. And in Dynasty, what did we have engaged at? Seventh, 8th round is about
7th, 8th round, yeah.
And it's not. I would pay a price there in Dynasty.
Yeah. No, he's an ideal back to grab later on, rounds 9, 10, 11. If you're going with the the monster wide receiver build where you've drafted the main core of your team in rounds 3 through 7 or 8 as wide receivers. And you only have one running back. These are the backs right now that we're talking about that you're going to be looking at. And I guarantee you, at least 1 or 2 of these guys are going to help people win leagues. They're going to every year somebody from this range, whether it's Tony Pollard from a couple of years ago. Last year, Rashad White was in round 8. 2 years ago, it was Josh Jacobs also. He had fallen down to the 7 or 8th round range. But every year, there's somebody out of this range because of the volatility of the position. When there's injuries, other guys get more volume. And it's just the next man up philosophy with most teams, because, well, as we saw with Zach Moss last year, when they don't have anybody else, but they have an offensive system in place, Zach Moss just got all of the carries that Jonathan Taylor would have gotten. And, the Indy offensive line was pretty good.
Mhm.
And so he was able to just fall forward and get monster production.
Yeah, and the other thing that helped Zach Moss there too was having a dual threat quarterback for those first 4 weeks. Anthony Richardson was around, so teams had planned for that. It creates more openings. Anyway.
For sure.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And so the last team we were going to talk about here was the Giants, and the Giants running back room is not one that looks exciting either. But as we've talked about, somebody's got to get the carries, right? They're not going to throw every down there in New York. At least Daniel Jones has not been known to be a volume passer. He's definitely going to be looking Malik Neighbors' way a few times this season. But aside from that, Devin Singletary is sitting there. They let Saquon Barkley go, and they signed the cheaper Singletary. Then they still have Eric Gray there from last year, who didn't do much. And then they drafted Tyron Tracy late in the draft. And Tyron Tracy's a super intriguing prospect, I'd say. 4 years as a wide receiver at Purdue, and then switched over to running back. He was a wide receiver first at Iowa, and then transferred to Purdue, where they made him a running back. So he has the receiving chops. And now we've got a situation. He did get banged up. He got hurt and was carted off this week. But we found out that it's not a terrible injury.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on the Giants backfield and the ability to steal a nice value there?
Actually, I kind of, just based on value, I like the whole backfield. Their RB1 ADP at 93. Is that right? Yeah, RB 33 overall. So you're getting him an RB3 rate. And he's going to have the first and second down carries. Now, Tyrone Tracy's going at 206. 206. He's not even getting drafted in redraft. But if you want to take a flyer or a waiver addition, I think he's going to be fantastic. You mentioned the converted wide receiver. He's going to get that third down back position. He's going to get that role, I believe. And they don't have a lot of receiving options there outside of Malik Neighbors. So I think he's going to pick up a lot of PPR points and could be one of those lottery ticket guys, right? He may not be super productive like come playoff time, but he'll be a guy that could get you some wins in the season that get you there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even early on in best ball, he's got the speed to break one at any time. So he could get you a 20-point week randomly any given week too, if you've got him stashed in best ball. I hope that Tracy comes back healthy from that injury. They're saying he may be ready for week 1, which is great news considering how the injury was first brought out to us. Looked like he might be done for the year. So, so much for training camp bits. I don't know what to do when I see these Twitter, when I see these tweets coming in. Half the time, they're way off, and then the other time, half of the time, it's just like with this Brandon Ayuk saga we've seen for the last month. You can't even look at any of these tweets. No reliable sources out there anymore.
Chris, I'm waiting for the notification that tells me he's either re-signed with San Francisco, or gotten his extension, or he's been traded to Pittsburgh. I mean, this is so bad. Like I'd much rather talk about what's Minnesota going to do, right? JJ's
Yeah.
done for the year. Addison's hurt. I don't know the extent to his injury. From last I heard, it wasn't as serious as first thought. Seems like that's every
No.
injury this year.
Right.
But I'd rather be talking about what's Minnesota going to do, and like how are they going to look this year, and what's I told you Sam Darnold was going to start a lot longer than you thought.
Yeah, well, you're definitely right on that one now.
But,
well, what about their backfield? Why don't we bring up Minnesota's backfield right now? You got Aaron Jones coming over from the Packers, and then Ty Chandler was there already. So do you think Ty Chandler, like what percentage would you actually put on as the over under for Ty Chandler's usage? Me, I'm probably a little high on him, but I'm saying it probably is 60-40 at least. I think that Chandler could be getting more first and second down looks than people think.
Well, I think they're going to have to rotate the backs more. I think they're going to run the ball more than initially planned. With JJ down, and we don't know what the deal is with Addison, and the fact that Hawkinson won't even be back until several weeks into the season. So their passing game is probably going to be enough to keep the run game open, is what I'm projecting, at least early in the season. So, I mean, I could see something like a 65-35 type split.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being a little nice to Ty Chandler there. But I mean, Aaron Jones isn't just a young, spry lad anymore, right?
No.
He's getting up there in age,
right.
And he looked crazy good at the end of last year. So, maybe early on we see a lot more Aaron Jones just because of what he does. But I would imagine this is not what they wanted. This is just not what they wanted.
No,
Aaron Jones.
It's not looking good. It hasn't started out well for the Vikings. But if they don't get any injuries to the defense, their defense does have some talent there yet. And so we'll see if the defense actually can play well, especially in their first 5 games. They've got a lot of tough games in their first 5 before the bye. And I've just noted that because I have McCarthy in a couple leagues. And so I was always looking at that as the week where he would come and play probably in week 6 after their bye, right? Or so it would be week 7. The bye is in week 6 that they have. And I kind of looked at that as when Hawkinson might come back too.
Right.
But as far as those first 5 weeks, they play the Giants in week 1, but after that they have let me think. It's like the Niners, Jets, Texans, and Packers. I don't know which order it is, but it's those 4 teams, all playoff teams from last year. Well, except for the Jets, but Jets are definitely a playoff caliber team. And you got some strong defenses in there. So, it comes down to the Vikings defense. Are they able to keep them in those games and not force Kevin O'Connell to just throw it 45 times with Darnold, and if they're throwing it that much, then Aaron Jones is definitely going to see some targets out of the backfield. Because he is an extremely good pass catcher out of the backfield.
I agree 100% with you on that one. And look, I'm not saying Sam Darnold's going to be in the quarterback 1 conversation, but I don't think he's as bad as people think. I think he got a bad shakeup in New York and then in Carolina, but I think being in San Francisco last year, I think probably got his head screwed on straight. He's looked great. All the reports coming out of Minnesota is that Darnold's been great, and they think they have a lot there with him. And they paid him pretty well. So, I think Darnold will do all right. It's just not the plan they wanted to be in with all these injuries that they now have to manage. But if what you say happens and they can manage through those first few weeks, maybe they aren't the first overall pick next year.
Yeah, no, from Sam Darnold now, the way I look at him, if I'm looking at him from redraft perspective, I could see him having a Sam Howell type season from last year. Sam Howell had an extremely high pass volume, just because of the game script and the play calling.
Mhm.
But we know that O'Connell tends to pass more. So just with that combined with, they're not predicted. I don't know what Vegas's win total is on the Vikings, but
Mhm.
I can't imagine it's more than 7.
Especially.
And so, right. So they're not going to be favored in most of their games. So you're just looking at a high pass volume. And if that ends up, if Darnold ends up being my quarterback 2 in a redraft format, I think I'm pretty fine with that, actually.
Yeah.
Because he's going to have a few games where he's throwing it 45 times. He gets to 300 yards and then he throws a couple touchdowns. He might throw 3 interceptions in the same game, but that doesn't really matter much to us in fantasy. So I don't know. I think that Darnold's low key moving up the board pretty fast here in redraft.
So I'm thinking this
and
season
if
could
need,
look like Geno Smith from 2 years ago.
right. Yeah.
No one sold on this guy, and then he comes out and puts up a very good, respectable season with good numbers.
Yeah.
A great QB too, because it's just because he's got good weapons. He's got great weapons around him, and once Addison's cleared and Hawk's back, I mean, he's gonna.
Yeah, I mean, look at it this way. You mentioned, Darnold, his time in New York and Carolina. I mean, between those two organizations, who was the best receiver he was throwing to? I mean, so he did have DJ Moore when he was there. That was 2 years ago. But in New York, where he was a top 5
and no
pick,
offensive line either. So same thing in New York.
What was Robbie Anderson his best receiver in New York? I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah. No.
So now you give him the arguably the best receiver in the game in Jefferson, and then you give him which hopefully will be a healthy Hawkinson and Addison, and then a great receiving back in Aaron Jones. I mean, I could see a surprisingly nice, decent, potentially like a top 15 season out of Darnold somehow, because the guy could throw. He's going to throw for 4,000 yards if he makes every start this year.
Yeah.
He's going to throw for at least 4,000 yards. It just comes down to actually how many touchdowns and interceptions he does throw. Right. So if he can keep the interceptions down, unlike Howell last year, Howell threw a ton of interceptions with all that volume, but if Darnold's able to keep the interceptions down a little, I just think he's a decent snag late as your second quarterback in redraft for sure right now. And if you want a cheap backup in Superflex or 2QB league, go out and kick the tires on him. I mean, I know somebody who. Now, this was when the J.J. McCarthy injury first came out, and it was only reported it was just going to be like 4 to 6 weeks. But somebody got Darnold for a future 3rd and 4th. Is what they gave up for him.
Wow.
So, just a couple ideas out there for what Darnold would cost you.
Well, in one of our dynasty leagues, you wouldn't have known this, but one of the trades that I executed, I was very close to asking for Darnold to be a part of the deal instead of draft compensation. But now I couldn't get that. Now I couldn't get that at all. But
right.
God, I wish I would have, though. I wish I would have.
Yeah, well, how many times can we say that in a dynasty trade that we've made, right?
Yeah.
But that's the fun of it.
The last deal I did that you got to see. Don't want to look back and say
the one that
deal.
The one that I talked about earlier this morning on the trade show, I was definitely on your side. I like that one. I understood Scoopodopoulos' side of it, being that he's rebuilding, but he gave up 2 young assets.
Yeah.
give it 2 young assets, but at the same time, I understand the fact that he's really just trying to play for a good draft pick this season, and he's probably not even looking to compete in the 25 season. He's looking more towards the 26 season, and so with Will Levis is a pretty volatile asset in the fact that he could have a great season and move up to, like I told you earlier, like a second or third round startup value because he's so young.
Mm-hmm.
If he has a great season, he's going to jump up the boards. But on the other end, he has a bad year, and he was a second round pick. The Titans have no real. They don't have the 5th-year option. They have no real investment in him to where they couldn't draft another quarterback next year or go out and look for a veteran. Because, they brought in this new offensive system that should be QB friendly. And then they brought in all these weapons for him as well. Like, they didn't just bring in a new head coach. They brought in guys to fit those needs for that kind of system. And even with Hopkins being hurt, you're still looking at plenty of talent there for the Titans. The backfield that we talked about earlier, I like Levis's prospects. He's a good gamble in my mind, at least.
Yeah. See, I don't like trading away first rounders. I like getting them, right? So I don't like trading them away. That was my only hesitation. But I'll tell you this: the more I thought about this trade for about 2 days, and I got more and more and more excited because of the weapons, like you mentioned. He's got Hopkins, he's got Ridley, he's got Chig. They also signed Tyler Boyd. They got 2 really good pass catching backs in Spears and Pollard.
Yep. Treylon's still there.
That's their 4th
talent. Yeah, he's the 4th guy.
Oh, you're just going to be our new number 1 now that AJ Brown's gone. No, he's their 4th. Some of that's his own fault. But either which way, I got very excited. And the fact that Derrick Henry's not there, we got to see it in the preseason game already on the goal line. He ran it in. So I believe there is a slight rushing upside with Levis for touchdowns. He
was a good runner in college.
He was a good runner. I don't think he's going to be asked to run, but I think you'll get some good scramble numbers out of him, and you will get some rushing touchdowns, which is a huge bump for him. So I got real excited, and then I like Wicks. I like Wicks. When his head coach compares him to Devontae Adams, I like a guy like that. Now it's just
like that.
Volume. Yeah, we'll get the volume opportunity.
I do think, even though in Green Bay, Wicks is looked at as the wide receiver 4, I think if you're ranking them in regards to talent, you can put Wicks right up there with Watson. And they could, as long as Watson doesn't get injured in the starting blocks, they could have a good 100-meter dash, and it would be close. And then the route running you talked about, Wicks is a better route runner than Watson. Okay. The only guy that can compete with him there, Romeo Doubs, is a good route runner, but he doesn't possess the athletic ability that Wicks has. Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at it, that's why some of the people in the Packers organization, compared him to Devontae Adams, because Adams has that good footwork, amazing route runner. And so if Wicks is anywhere near that, you could see Jordan Love, leaning his way a little bit. And I'm sure with Watson's injury history, and then Jaden Reed got banged up a little last year too, that they just seem to never have a full healthy quartet of all 4 of those guys last season. Right. And if that's the case again, Wicks is going to be, if there's only 3 healthy wide receivers, Wicks is going to get plenty of snaps.
Plenty of looks.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on the running backs before we wrap this one up?
Not at this moment. No, not really. I think we'll have plenty more to talk about as we get through some of these preseason games. And we'll get to look more at those middle round running backs, how we really feel about them. as we get closer to the season. I think there's a couple in there, not necessarily in a backfield dispute, but like guys that we were talking about earlier, like your Ramondre Stevensons in that area of running backs. I think there's actually a lot of good little hits in there. You just got to know which ones.
Yeah, I think if I just would say one thing, it would be, don't be afraid to wait until rounds 9, 10, 11, 12 for your running back 2 in this year's draft, because grab that receiver value in the middle rounds and there'll be plenty of running backs for you to grab later on. Yeah. So if that's one advice tip I can give anybody for this season, that would be it. So
well,
all right, wrap it up. Oh yeah,
one advice here: you can go double hero RB this year.
Yeah,
or you could still go double receiver, and you're okay. There's actually a lot of depth this in this year's drafts. So I'm gonna play with a few of them, all different looks this year, and see which one comes out best.
So. Yeah, it is a fun year for drafting, that's for sure. All right. We're trying to bang out as many videos as we can with extra content for you guys this week. So we're going to wrap this one up, and we're probably going to get started on another one, right? So with that, I'll just say I'm out and remind you all to never stop working.